Hello everyone, welcome back to my series where I help you upskill from a developer to a software engineer. Many of you are developing projects and hosting them on cloud services like Vercel, Netlify, and AWS. The problem with this hosting method is that it isn't free and it's another layer of abstraction, allowing you to bypass essential skills that all software engineers should possess. As software engineers, we want to strive to own the full stack and understand every step in not just the development process, but also the deployment process. If you've been following along with the series, then you've already set up your Ubuntu server and prepared it to host your web applications. Now, we're going to install and configure NGINX, an open source web server software used for high performance web serving, load balancing, reverse proxying, and caching. It acts as a single intermediary between clients and backend servers, distributing traffic and improving application performance, scalability, and reliability. All right, so we're gonna get right into this. So of course, first, what you're gonna wanna do is start by installing NGINX. I guess I should mention that for this video, due to some difficulties with the VM, we're actually working directly in my own personal Ubuntu server, Ultron. So of course you're going to start with installing NGINX. Now, of course, I already have it installed on this computer, so you know it's not going to work. Oh, actually it is. So once you've installed NGINX, then you're going to navigate into your config file, which is going to be here. So it's going to be /etc/nginx/nginx config. You're going to go in there. So as you can see, I already have a bunch of things in this file, but you're not going to have anything. So let me actually start by showing you. So I basically just made this little static web page here just for the sake of the video. And so we're going to be deploying this today. Something simple, right? So come back into our config file here. Essentially, all of these different server blocks you see are different domains that I have for my different projects, right? But we are going to be working with this one today. So first and foremost, when you're trying to deploy anything on NGINX, you have to start with a server block. So just like any other coding language, that's something, you know, really simple. Just server, and then an open bracket and a closed bracket, curly braces. So now within, right, our server bracket, that's where we're gonna have our parameters. So first and foremost, you're gonna have to have a domain to use NGINX. Now there's a couple of different services you can use, Squarespace, GoDaddy, in order to acquire a domain. But you do have to have a domain. That is a prerequisite to use NGINX, because just using your static IP won't work. You know, I don't know who manages the internet. That's actually an interesting idea, but it won't allow for anything that's just on a static IP to be served. So you are going to have a domain in order to deploy. So, but domains are actually a lot cheaper than people probably think they are, as long as it's not like a very high in-demand domain. You know, if it's just your name, unless you have a very common name, it's probably not going to be expensive. So you get your domain, and then you just essentially need to tell NGINX what domain that it is serving to. So you know, you set it to this domain, and that also though needs to have a handshake with the domain itself from the provider. So that comes with DNS. So you need to know your static IP from the last video that you set, and then use that static IP in order to set your domain. So I actually will just show you. So if you're looking for your static IP, or well, really actually it is It is supposed to be a static IP, but I actually just learned recently it can change. But it's actually your public IP. So you're gonna call curl ifconfig.me -4, not -4, -4, because the -4 is going to make sure that it's an IPv4 address and not an IPv6 address. If you call it without that flag, it's gonna bring up an IPv6 that I don't know who thought IPv6 was even legible, but that's what we have now. So, all right. Let's get back into our config file here. So you have your server name and your domain. Now we're gonna skip all this and we're going to go down to where I'm serving the static files, and then I'm gonna show you guys exactly how we do that. So first off, you're gonna wanna know a little bit of regex, in order to work with NGINX, because these location brackets that are nested within the server brackets are your URL routing, right? So there are actually multiple apps that I have hosted under this same domain, which is just my name. Multiple apps that are hosted under the same domain, and you can do that as long as you route it properly. So when we're talking about what we're working with today, which is deploying that web page that I showed you, a lot of this is a lot more complicated than what it actually is, right? This is actually a lot more complicated because it uses PHP, but that actually is perfect for this example because I get to explain each one of these to you and how we did it. So let's say we wanted to rewrite this. So okay, let's actually start with this one here, because this one is actually serving the main application and is properly serving all of the PHP files. So of course, your first thing, don't include that. That is because this is going to be a comment, because obviously it's already configured, so I don't want to mess anything up here, but I want to type it out for you guys' learning process to understand exactly how this works. So every time that you're doing this, you of course start with location. Now the tilde essentially just tells it that you're about to use regex here. This caret sign essentially means anything can go here. So this is anything at the start is basically what that means. And /content. So /content, this is where the actual routing starts. So the actual routing starts here with that /content. And if you weren't using regex, then it would just look like this. And essentially this is just saying that from the base domain, so in our case here, the domain is Nasir Griffin, my name, right? This is saying that at any location at Nasir Griffin /content. Now, excuse me, you do always want to have a trailing slash, but it's technically not necessary. You can have no trailing slash and have it just be something here at this domain, just like /content, at this path, just /content, and it will work. But I strongly recommend having a trailing slash, because there's a ton of issues that tend to arise when you don't have it. So we're going to include our trailing slash. Now, this bit of regex that was here, this is actually going to, if you wanted to just copy this from this video and and use it, you could do that. And I'm going to explain this here. So essentially this piece of regex is just saying the dot just means any character and any number of characters can go here. So any character and any number of characters can go here. The plus is like a connector. This / is an escape character, and it essentially just means that this dot that follows is the actual dot, right? Not the dot character here, which says anything. And then PHP. Now, this .php can actually be any file extension that you want. And you actually probably observed, we have one for JavaScript here. And I did that because that web page does use some JavaScript in it. And essentially the reason why we have this is we want to make it clear to NGINX that we want it to serve any files that are, because okay, you should know this, you know, if you've been developing for a little while, but just, you know, in case we have any true beginners in here, when you have images or any type of static files on a web page, the browser is actually literally requesting those from, you know, wherever the files are coming from. So in this case, Ultron, right? Ultron is using NGINX to serve these files, and the browser is requesting the files, not the web page. So the browser, if there's a .png file, the browser is actually requesting that .png file. So we want to make sure that that file is being served, so that when the browser requests it, it can actually be returned. If you don't include this, it's a hit or miss. Sometimes it'll work, but if you're serving a static web page, I recommend just having it in there. And I'm going to explain this in a moment because this is really important. It's probably the most important thing. But essentially, it just ensures that, you know, JavaScript files get served, and in this case, it ensures that PHP files get served. Now, a lot of you guys are probably going to end up having to use PHP because PHP is kind of making like a comeback with, I believe Shopify uses PHP. I believe that there's another one too that uses PHP now, but I don't use like the website maker softwares. You know, obviously I do it myself. So if it comes to mind, I'll put it out there. But I'm pretty sure that, you know, quite a few of those platforms now are using PHP. So it'll probably be useful for you to know how to use that and deploy it. So now, again, remember, so this is, you know, going to be a block. So gotta have our closing bracket. Now in the middle here, this is where it gets a little more complicated, a little more interesting. So this root, right? Now you've probably seen root, and then in the JavaScript section and in some of the other location blocks we have here, you see alias. So here's how that works. When you have root essentially says, and when you define the root, so let's do that. So just for clarity, portfolio / 20xx webpage. So when I set that to root, that basically says that this here, right, this URL is going to get appended to this root. So, okay, what does that mean? Excuse me. So, if this URL here was, say, /content/home.php, right? Then this basically says that this is going to append this URL here, right, to this root. So then the full path would be /portfolio /20xx webpage /content/home.php, essentially, right? So when you have root, that's what that does. So that actually would and this is why we have to get into the factors that we have here, because that would actually end up not working. That would actually end up not working if we didn't have our params that we have here. So that's when we get into fast CGI. So fast CGI is really important if you're going to be working with PHP, especially. And I will, just for anybody who doesn't care about, you know, using PHP and just wants to do static web pages with HTML, that's so easy, honestly, you know, there would be no video. So So let's actually get into how you would install that. So if you have sudo apt install, so I would recommend, if you're going to do this, using version 8.3. I'm using 8.3. So, you know, just like you install anything else, sudo apt install php 8.3-fpm. And, you know, I already have it, so, you know, it's not going to do anything. But, you know, just for the sake of understanding, you know, what it is that we're doing, that basically just will allow the server to run the PHP and then serve the result, and not actually just serve the static PHP files, because that doesn't work. And basically, so basically PHP is, you know, obviously a programming language, so it gets run server side. The browser can't run PHP, right? So the server has to run the PHP and then serve the result, essentially. And that's what that piece of technology that we just installed, the PHP FPM, that's what that does. So now once we get into that, you know, that also includes our fast CGI. There we go. That includes our fast CGI. So now we're going to use that. So you're going to include it, and, you know, already by including it, that essentially tells you know, NGINX that this root is going to be using it, right? And now we are going to include our path for it, so it knows essentially where to find our socket. So it's going to be just like that, just like how you see it above. All right. Yep. Okay. So we have to include the library, you know, let it know where the socket is, and then this is really important. So again, if you've been doing web development for any amount of time, you know that the base of any web page is its index.html, right? But you know, PHP can also be an index file in NGINX. I think NGINX will actually let you use any file you want as the index. And fast CGI will of course allow you to have an index.php as like the, you know, the hub essentially of your web page, and not only of your web page, but of your you know, of this specific root, right? So finally, that last parameter there, fast CGI underscore param script file name, right? Now this is really important, because remember I said earlier, if you try to use this, right, and you just try to use it as you know, this root, like I said, it's going to append this URL to the end of this root, which is not going to be correct. So if instead you do the document root, right, which is just this, right, then essentially you're telling it, okay, don't append, right? Don't append that this entire URL. If you put it as document root slash argument 1, right? Argument 1 is going to be this value at the end, and that's why we have the $sign here too, that denotes that this is that argument, right? That's going to just be this last part of the URL here. So now if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because you're telling it that the script that you're working with is going to be the document root, which is /portfolio/20xx webpage / our argument, right? Which when you navigate here and you're navigating, you're calling a PHP file, right? It's going to be able to get the file name from here. So then it makes perfect sense, because that means that the script file name is going to end up being /portfolio/20xx webpage /$1, right? Which, remember, $1 is our home.php. So with this configuration, if you were to send in any PHP file, right, and navigate from content, then it's going to load it properly as long as your fast CGI pass is configured correctly and you follow the correct syntax, which I've just shown you right here. So now some explanations for some other things, right? You always want to have a fallback, right? If all else fails, okay, say that you have navigated to content, right? But a file like, I don't know, noscript.php was attempted to be called, right? That obviously would not work because there is no noscript.php within the directory, right? So that's why we need this fallback script. And this fallback script essentially says that if you navigate to anywhere, in content, and it, whatever you navigated to can't be found, then it's gonna just default back to the index.php, right? So anytime there's like a null, like a null thing found that just doesn't exist, it'll always fall back to index.php. And you want that so that you're not, serving 404s and stuff on your web page, because it's just not professional, So, all right. And now this is important here. So the reason why this public has its own location bracket is because this is where I'm serving all of the pictures, right? All of the pictures for that web page that you just saw are all stored in there because they're static files. So now I can explain alias, right? So alias and root essentially have the same core function, they just work differently. So don't put them both in the same location bracket, it won't work. You're basically trying to tell it to do the same thing in two different ways. So now alias essentially says, instead of appending this URL, right, to this parameter, replace this parameter outright with this URL. So essentially, right, if somebody was to navigate to /content/public/NasirGriffin.png, right? If someone was to navigate there, this part, right, this part here, which is this part, right, gets fully replaced by this alias. So what NGINX will end up serving is /webpage/public/NasirGriffin.png. So remember, root appends, alias replaces. So both can work, both can actually work really well, depending on what it is you want to do. And both are viable for, deployment, depending on what it is that you are trying to accomplish. But with PHP, I would recommend pretty much always using root. And for everything else, unless you have a file structure such that, anything that the user might, so the only way I would use root, and it's not for PHP, and I'm not using script file name, is essentially that within the file structure of my project, I have like a folder called content. So my domain is routing the content, and there's a folder called content within my within the physical server, within the file structure of the physical server, that I'm then storing the different files in. But if it's not that way, and most projects are not built that way, you're gonna want to use alias, because alias will ensure that if your files are at the root, that, you know, you don't have to worry about, you don't really have to worry at all about trying to have issues with routing, as well as generally, right? And it depends on, you know, like, and this is very subjective because, you know, there's so many different ways to build a web page, but most people have, you know, the language, you know, whether you're using JavaScript, especially if you're using a framework like React or Angular, the framework itself actually manages the routing. In those cases, your index.html is going to be at the root, and the only thing you even need to do is point the server to the index.html, and then at that point, you know, the rest gets handled by the rest at that point gets handled by the framework, and NGINX doesn't have to really do anything. So in those situations, right, it literally couldn't be any easier. So let's say I want to have location, and this is just showing you again from the ground up. Now this is when you're not working with PHP, and this should show you how easy it is, right? And I would always recommend handling routing from you know, your index.html in your actual application rather than doing it through NGINX. But it's, as you can see, fully possible to do it through NGINX if you wanted to. So let's just say I said, you know what, forget the PHP stuff. I'm going to build a whole new page, deploy it on content, and I'm going to just put it here, right? So when you do it that way, right? Now, again, we're pretending that this is a, you know, that this new app now is using just a regular index.html, no PHP nonsense, right? So then at that point, we can just have an alias, right? And point it to the directory, and right, point it towards the directory, and then all we have to do at that point, I think that when you're using alias, you have to, yeah, have a trailing slash. And then all we have to do at that point is just give it an index, right? And then we can just say index.html. And at that point, that's it. That's literally all that there is to it. There's nothing more that you would even include in this. And the reason for that is that it's very simple, right? It's gonna go in, it's gonna go to, you know, this. All right, so you route to, say, /content/home, right? The first thing it's gonna do is find index.html, right? It's gonna go to index.html, it's gonna open index.html, right? And it's going to find index.html. First off, it's going to find index.html because, again, remember, our alias replaces. So if you navigate to /content/, it's going to look inside of /portfolio /20xx webpage for, you know, anything, because that's essentially what you just asked it to find by using alias. So then it's going to go into that directory, and it's going to look for index.html because that's what we set our index to. It's going to go into index.html. Index.html is then going to look for home, right, as you know, a root, and then it's going to navigate us to the proper file to serve from the index.html file. So if you're just trying to serve, you know, like a basic, you know, web page, it's not even necessarily basic, but okay, if we look at the web page that I have for Ultron, right, this is actually a React front end, right? This is a React front end, and so within this build folder is the index.html. But again, React handles all of the routing for me. So because React handles all the routing, I don't have to do it, right? All I have to do is tell NGINX that if anyone routes to Ultron, go inside of that folder, right, find the index.html, and then run it. That's it. It's really that simple. Now this try files, right, I would say to include this. It's essentially just the fallback, right? We spoke about that earlier. So again, say nothing works. The user has navigated to some route that doesn't exist. In the event that that happens, and that's why also, you know, if you're using something like React, even if you're using, because React doesn't just by default handle, you know, you need to use React router. Same for Angular. Angular does have built-in routing though, but make sure you always have a default page, your home page or something, because NGINX can't save you from that, right? It can, because you can set this try files to whatever you want, right? So it's going to try the URL. If that fails, then the second parameter is where it should actually go to, right? The fallback. And that's just the index.html. But if your index.html also doesn't have any way to handle like a I'm sorry about that, doesn't have any way to handle like a page that a URL that doesn't have a route, right? Then it's still going to just be a 404, and you know, we don't want that. It's like I said, it's not professional. It doesn't look good, even though, right, you can be like, well, it's the fault of the user for navigating somewhere where it doesn't exist. We just don't want that, right? It just doesn't look as good as if, you know, you accounted for that and your web page just handles it, right? So this would be if we essentially, if I would have used like just a regular HTML file for my index, and if I didn't build that page using PHP. But all right, so then now with all of that, once you've done that, the only thing you need to do at that point, I don't even think I need to save that, honestly. Now you're gonna have to restart NGINX, because NGINX, right? NGINX cannot just by default like read your config file and then apply the changes. It has to be reloaded. It only reads the config file like upon start. It doesn't perpetually read it. So it doesn't read it in real time. Let me say that. It doesn't read it in real time. So now once you've upgraded your config file, then all you got to do is reload NGINX. There you go. And then now if I curl www.content. Hold up, wait. Hopefully I didn't mess something up here. Okay, well, I don't know why the curl didn't work, but as you can see, right, when we navigate there, it works just fine and everything is good. Even if we navigate to just content, then there we go. It'll then navigate us to home. So that's actually something I can show you really quick why just content works. And you might have caught that when we were in there. So up here, as you can see, I actually have a location for content, right? With no trailing slash. And what ends up happening is this return, right, returns a 301, which is a redirect, right? And then this second parameter is the URL to redirect to. So if any of my users, you know, are trying to get to my content page, say for example, and they navigate to just content with no trailing slash, it'll redirect them to content with a trailing slash, and then these different location blocks will then handle that. So it will first come, you know, up to the top. Is it public? No, it's not public. Is it a JavaScript file? Nope, it's not a JavaScript file. Is it a PHP file? Nope. is it another, this was essentially so that all PHP files get handled. But then it'll drop down to, well, it's just the base. So what do I do when I'm at just content/content? I go to my index.php, right, which it does, and then this parameter, query string, right, essentially just says that when you're in the index.php, run its routing logic, right? And then it does that, and the routing logic within the file, I can tell you, always sends it to the home page. And that's why if the user navigates to just content, it always takes them to the home page. So now with NGINX fully configured, you have the power to host any static applications on your Ubuntu server. Now the only price you have to pay for hosting is the price of your own Wi-Fi connection. So today we touched on serving static files, but NGINX is much more powerful than that. Modern day web technologies like Node come with their own server that through reverse proxying, we can also deploy with NGINX. So in the next episode, I'll be showing you how to do just that. So until then, keep upskilling, keep learning, stay curious, and stay disciplined. You're one step closer to owning the full stack and becoming a software engineer. This is Nasir 20XX, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.